I'm going to catch up with the Nationals leader David Littleproud in just a moment. But first up, listen to what he had to say today on ABC Radio, looking back at the election and the role of the then opposition leader, Peter Dutton.
When you look at where the polls were at Christmas time and you see where they shifted, I think the Labor Party were able to make Peter Dutton unelectable, and what they couldn't do is put a vote next to him, and they held their nose and put a vote next to Anthony Albanese.
David Littleproud now joins me from Canberra. Good to talk to you again, David. Labor made Peter Dutton unelectable. How so, and why wasn't the coalition able to do the opposite?
Yeah, well, they were better at demonising and tearing down Peter's character, and not the man that I know. And unfortunately, what that did, and some of that was our own goals around some of our policies like work from home, but also the fact that I don't think we were able to get the media to cut through, apart from Peter being there to defend himself. And I don't think that's a reflection on Pete. I think that was the fact that we were trying to defend him, but we couldn't get cut through. It became very presidential. And Labor had a very slick campaign, and you can't walk away from that. You've got to be brutally honest. They were able to demonise him, and I think that started with Cyclone Alfred. And they even tried with that smear around his share ownership and house ownership with his father. And I think we weren't nimble enough, and we weren't defensive enough of Peter's his own character and what he sort of man he was and what he stood for. And I think we allowed Labor to get away with this perpetrated lie of a $600 billion nuclear power plant. In fact, that was perpetrated off a report from the Smart Energy Council, an organisation that represents renewable companies.
Yeah, it's just a lie.
That have a financial vestige. Exactly. And
just an outright lie. But
independently costed.
But tell me then, do you and the Nationals accept your share of the blame for the election failure?
Oh, totally. And in terms of articulating that report, and I remember having a very robust debate with Laura Jays one morning during their campaign about this $600 billion lie being perpetrated, and the gallery that was travelling with Anthony Albanese were allowing him unchallenged to sprout it out every day. And we weren't able to get that, and we weren't able to get the cut through. We can't sit here and whinge about it. Those were the rules we played. They played it smicker than us. And, you know, we tried tactically, not just myself and the Nats and some of the other Libs. I think Michael Sukkar courageously also tried to stand up and defend Dutts at times. And we just couldn't get the cut through. It became very presidential, and it was just Peter with the nightly news every night rather than any other talking heads, and it just became frustrating. And I don't think that's a reflection on Peter. I think it's all not being able to get that cut through and to really get back at tearing Anthony Albanese's character down.
Now, Bob Katter's just had a chat with Ross Greenwood on Business Now, and he's laid into the Nationals. He says, you've failed regional Australia. Here's a little bit of Bob Katter.
The best part of 20 years, they were running the Australian government as Deputy Prime Minister, and if there was something they did for rural Australia, I'm not aware of it.
How do you respond to his criticisms?
Rookwood Weir in Rockhampton, the Inland Rail, the over $7 billion into dam infrastructure that was placed out there for states to spend, the countless billions of dollars into roads, saving the live sheep industry. You can sit on the sideline and yell and scream and love Bob to bits, but unfortunately, the numbers don't support Bob's accusation there.
Right, now let's get back to the coalition split. You've identified some key policy areas: the regional fund, the idea of sanctions, divestiture sanctions against supermarkets if there's foul play revealed. Also, the nuclear policy. If the Liberal Party comes out and says it will stick broadly with these policies that were taken to the most recent election, would you walk back into that party room and reform the coalition?
Yes, and that's what was articulated to our party room. There were 4 policy areas, including also reform to the universal service obligation to protect mobile phone towers to be repaired and maintained in a serviceable level. We made it very clear, but we couldn't get that guarantee. And as Peter Credlin articulated last night, the convention within the coalition is that all the coalition policies that were taken to an election are maintained. until by exception they're taken away. Now, Susan made a commitment, and I respect that she wanted to review all policies. Everything was taken off the table. I respected that and conceded that, but what I wanted to make sure was that those 4 key areas were maintained, because it gave us confidence not just about delivering technology for telecommunications, but also getting away from this all renewables approach that really frightens us, and we're bearing the burden of.
But you'd understand, of course, she couldn't give that guarantee. She'd be preempting her own party room. She's got to give her party room a chance to endorse these policies. But it would seem a small price to pay, and that if the Liberals could tick off these policies at their next party room, you'd be back in coalition with them. Why isn't that the agenda? What is the policy sticking point you don't think they'll be able to deliver?
Well, I asked that to be articulated, and I took written form to my party room, but we couldn't get that in a surety of those 4 areas. And I was happy to concede that there are others that obviously Liberal policies that cause us some consternation, that I was happy to continue on with. But these were 4 areas that were important to us, because they would change the lives of the people we represent, and they were ones that we fought for a long time. But I wasn't being unreasonable. I was happy to concede the rest in terms of where we were. And if the Liberal Party gets to that juncture, I've made it very clear the door's open. But that was the decision that was predicated in our party room on pure principle. And it'll mean at great cost to many of our people take pay cuts, but they're not worried about that. These are real changes that would help regional Australians, and we can't walk away from that. We've been given a privileged position to come to this place. And I couldn't walk back into the streets of Roma and Charleville and Clifton and Dalby and look people in the eye and say, I've traded away something that would benefit their lives for political expediency.
But didn't you just need more time?
I respect debate.
Didn't you just need more time to sort this out? Once Susan Lee names a front bench where they're all Liberals, it's going to be very hard for her to unwind that, because to bring you back into coalition, she's going to have to sack a bunch of people.
Well, we were in no hurry. This wasn't a timeline that we perpetrated. It was one that we were accepting, in that Susan wanted to form a coalition and to announce a shadow cabinet. This wasn't a timeline that we decided on. It was one that, and with respect also of her personal circumstances, we were happy to work through. But I made it very clear after our initial meeting, I took back what Susan took to our initial party room meeting last Friday, that it was unacceptable and that there was that it was serious enough for our room to consider not re-signing.
Have you and Susan Lee spoken in the last 24 hours to see whether there's a process, an emergency process you could put in place to save the coalition?
No, not today. I've got to admit I haven't had a bandwidth other than be in studios like yours. But as Susan and I left on Wednesday, or Tuesday, was saying that the door will be open, and I'm open to anything. But I'd rather be upfront and honest now about what were the sticking points, and that came from my room. This isn't an individual decision. This is the collective room going, these are what are important to us. And if we get that, they will be something that are important in a legacy item and protecting our people into the future, that we can work through the other things. They're superfluous. Do you accept that in many respects?
Do you accept that the biggest winner out of this is Albanese and his government, because they're now just peerless in the Australian Parliament, and the greatest losers are the Australian voters, because we're left with a shambolic and divided opposition?
Well, that's why I've left the door open and made it very clear. I haven't concealed anything. We've been very upfront about what's important to us, and it's important for the coalition to get back together, and I'm pragmatic about that. But I've been given a privileged position to come and change the lives of the people I represent. I'd be letting them down if we didn't stand up for the values and those really important things. Happy to concede on things where we have to, but these I don't believe are insurmountable, and they're not huge. That's why we're disappointed, but we're optimistic that at some juncture that we'll be able to get back in with the Liberal Party and be a coherent coalition before the next election.
Yeah, let's hope that sooner rather than later. Thanks again for joining us, David. I appreciate it.